I hope that every hunter gets a chance to kill one, just because like the playful kid part of me tells me that I've never walked a guy or gal to their first elk and had them look at me and be like, it's smaller than I thought it was.
Mm.
They're just big.
They're huge
You know
animals.
what I mean? And if
Yeah.
you've never had that opportunity, and it sounds so like simplistic or whatever, but it's relevant.
Yeah.
You know, they're just the one big, big majestic game animal we have here.
Yeah. I've guided, a lot of elk at this point. Over 100,000 pounds of elk I've had in my hands. And especially the first elk of the season, every time I walk up to them, I'm like, damn, these things are big.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
These are stories of outdoor adventure and expert advice from folks with calloused hands. I'm James Nash, and this is the Six Ranch Podcast. What's the largest number of pack animals, riding animals you had at one time?
Like I owned?
Yeah.
I think it was 52.
What was the worst of them?
Like individuals?
Yeah. Do you remember its name?
Yeah, so the worst, I actually had a set of mules, and there's Peter, Piper, Pickles, Pepper, and Pickles did not last. Like, and so I had sets of them like that, and whenever we would buy a set, we would have like a theme.
Yeah.
Right. So in whatever popped into somebody's head, we'd kind of discuss it as with the guides or whatever in the bunkhouse, but we'd always do themes like that. And I remember those because I bought them with the outfitting business. And I remember this Pickles mule, the reality is none of this set were great at first, but this Pickles mule, like from across the corral, had like the look in her eyes that was like, I'm never going to get better.
Yeah.
So she didn't last, but that's probably the worst mule I had. I had several that, like, they made it through years of outfitting just because they had some sort of trait that justified me to tolerate bad aspects of them.
Like something that was really redeeming.
Yeah, like no problem packing bears out. Like, that was redeeming. You could be really, really bad, but if you didn't get all snorty and crappy around bears, like, I could tolerate a lot, A
lot of mules have an ism of one kind or another.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's something that they just can't handle. So
Sure.
If you find a really steady one, that's pretty rare. But I think they've all got a chink in their armor somewhere.
Yeah. And they're kind of, like, I always view them as mules. If they have one thing that they don't like, they're kind of like, you always get that advice about, when you're younger, you always get that advice about women. Like, don't get a girlfriend or marry somebody that you think you're going to change them later on. There's an aspect of that applies to mules.
Yeah.
If they have a really bad trait, don't bet on the fact that you're going to be able to turn it around.
What was Pickles' deal?
So she was just mean. And sometimes you'll get one like that that's mean. And I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if mules, their memory doesn't get to them, and depending on whatever their history was, whenever they were broke or whatever, in my mind, I think there's like maybe a couple situations in her life that might have just made her mean.
Yeah.
That's
some scar tissue there.
Yeah. And I feel like the same deal with mules are less forgiving in that regard. Like, I kind of recall situations. I think anybody who's had, a pet dog or any animal that requires like some sort of like discipline or training, there'll be a moment where you get upset at them. You yell at them louder than you should or something like that, and then you regret it. With mules, you never have to regret it because they're going to remind you.
Yeah.
Like, they're gonna get like, I mean, this could be woo-woo, but I feel like I might have like yelled at a mule or snapped a chain over a mule's nose like harder than I should have, and then like 12 hours later in the dark, like Alice the mule is looking at me like, this is my moment.
Yeah.
You know? So
Yeah,
I really truly believe
it's my
that.
time to
I'm sure
shine.
there's people that listen
Yeah.
and they're like, that's total bullshit. But I think that's the truth about mules. Whereas I think horses have a little less of that. They're a little more forgiving.
Yeah. I mean, horses can definitely develop a bad relationship with people and get to the point where, they've just got psychological damage, and
Yeah.
you almost can't get them back out of it again.
Sure.
And, some people are abusive to all kinds of animals. And I think we've all kind of like had a friend that had that pound dog that, like, oh, they don't like men, or
Yeah.
they're scared of newspapers, and it's like, oh, something bad happened to this dog.
Sure.
And mules almost seem like they can make sport of it at times.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And I think what comes with that is more personality.
What was the best of them?
The best at my mules?
Or horses?
Yeah, so let's talk about mules, because I got like I got a thing for them. But and not that I didn't have good horses at that time, but I always had a thing for big Belgian cross mules.
Yeah.
And I think it's just like the disposition that would come with them. And I've talked to guys that have a differing opinion about them, and maybe they had, they just had a different strain of them or whatever. But to me, they were always, you could get them docile.
Yep.
And they were the right size, the right pace. I think the way I packed, I was never in like a huge hurry.
Mm-hmm.
And those mules just kind of fit me. And I had one named Julie, and she was probably my favorite mule. Matter of fact, she's still alive because I saw her a couple weeks ago.
They live a long time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I know for a fact that there's still mules. There's a bunch of mules that I bought with my business. I sold with my business a decade later, and I've talked to guys that worked for that business a decade before I was even around, and those mules are still there.
Yeah.
So they live long, but plus they have a longer working life.
Yep.
Yeah,
no, there's 40-year-old mules that are
Mm-hmm.
still out there packing weight in the mountains, and that simply doesn't happen with horses.
Right. Yeah. Yep.
For those that don't know, what is a mule? How do you make a mule?
Yeah, so it's just a cross between a horse and a donkey. And because of that, it seems to me that most mules, like when I categorize mules, I tend to categorize them by the horse,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure there's people that are more into raising mules that have a deeper understanding of that. But usually, like I described Julie, like a Belgian cross mule, or it could be like a Morgan mule. Like you see a lot of these really pretty mules that come out of the Amish country. They're smaller mules, and I think they're using them for carts, and they're using them for work. And like that's a specified type of mule that's based on the horse. They're crossing them with like light draft horses. So that's how I categorize them. But that's what they are.
And I have heard that there's mules now that can breed, but typically mules are sterile.
Yeah. It's an odd case that they can breed.
And there's lots of different kinds of donkeys, although we're not as familiar with that world as we are with horses. But like my grandma, when she was packing in the Sierras, raising, my dad and aunts and uncles as kids in the mountains of California, they used Mammoth Jacks.
Yeah.
Great big donkeys.
Yeah.
And they were really gentle, and they were really happy to throw an infant in those packs.
Yeah.
And be confident that Jack was going to take care of him. Some of my favorite mules are draft mules as well.
Yeah.
That are mixed with a draft horse. And, you can put a lot of weight on them. They tend to be a little bit calmer all the time. There was a pair of mules when I was first learning to pack named Bert and Ernie, and they were both Belgium crosses.
Everybody's got a Bert mule.
Yeah. You ought to have a Bert mule if you're going to have a big one. Bert would set his foot on top of my foot whenever I worked on the front end of the pack, and he was huge. This is a 2,000 plus pound animal, and it made me really nervous. But he was so sweet; it was almost like he was holding hands, kind of.
Like he wasn't going to put the weight on you.
Yeah, but he would just do that every time, and he just had the longest, softest ears, and he loved to put his head in your chest. And I would sleep with him in the in those meadows in the backcountry
Yeah.
sometimes and just go lay on him. And that's such an irreplaceable feeling of like being, a teenager, guiding in a wilderness area, packing somebody's gear in there, and then going out in the middle of some meadow that's cold and there's dew on the grass and snuggling up against a
Oh
great
yeah.
big mule. Like, it's pretty incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like the horse packing, mule packing, again, like not to get too woo woo, but I have a feeling that it's like ingrained in humans. I mean, we've been using them a long time, and it's. I look back on all the years of packing, and there's not a lot of rational thinking in there. They're a massive amount of work. Hunting with them is a ton of work, and I think some people have a hard time understanding. Like they'll go on one horseback hunt, one pack-in hunt, and they're like, I don't understand why you would hunt this way. And the thing is like you have to get a grip on that. Part of it, part of the experience is the horses and mules.
Yep.
Like that is part of the deal. And sometimes it takes a while for people to realize that. And then I think you get into that mode of realizing that, yeah, like this is part of the experience and it's awesome and it's irreplaceable. And there's probably a part of us that's so just like generations of using horses to as a major like beast of burden throughout human history is pretty wild. And I don't know, maybe I'm making this up, but it sure seems like it's ingrained in us.
Yeah.
And I'm even obsessed with like the history, like listening to, I can't remember, what is it? He used to have a podcast, and I think now it's behind a paywall, but the history of the Mongols. And like he goes, it's
Like Dan Carlin?
yeah,
Yep.
he has a good series on him, and he talks about the horse stuff, and you hear him talk about like these guys having 7 or 8 horses, a piece all the time, or not 7 or 8, like I think 70 or 80 horses, and their wives, they just lived off that, and they moved around like that. And it's crazy to think about and reflect on not just going on an elk hunting trip and dealing with them for 10 days, like your whole life.
Yeah.
And it's not just Mongols. There's so many people in history that every morning they woke up and they harnessed horses or they saddled horses. Pretty wild.
And I'll shout out Dan, the Hardcore History podcast. That is the best way for me to interface with history that I've ever encountered. He gets really deep into subjects that typically get glossed over, but he does so in a way that's very engaging.
Yeah.
And yeah, you do have to pay for most of those episodes now, but they're very much worth it. And if you're going to pay for an audiobook or something like that, this is a good show to support. So
Sure.
For those who are into history, I highly recommend you check that one out. Yeah, man. 52 animals. Dude, you had a huge, huge outfit, and I'm still trying to kind of wrap my mind around it. I don't think I've ever had more than like 8 guides working for me at a time. So the scale of what you were doing, both in terms of like the number of people that were working for you, the number of animals you had to take care of, the number of clients that you were dealing with, it's just massive. So kind of talk me through what that large scale outfitting business looks like.
So I think when I look at it, how I separated it in my mind, right? Like I had a hunting and guiding business, and then I had a logistics business,
Yeah.
like my packing logistics
Right.
business. And I think over time, I realized like I was running 2 different businesses, and of course there was overlap with staff and all of that. But in a sense, once I realized that, I made much better decisions about the staff I had, how I scheduled, the different ways I managed the business. And what I ended up having was I had a lot of crew. It's very hard to find somebody nowadays that say really wants to be they want to hunt elk in the wilderness, they want to guide people in the wilderness, but they're also able to, take care of 40 horses and, do a lot of your own doctoring and that sort of thing. It's hard to find somebody. I think there's people who really like guiding hunters, and I think there's horse guys.
Yep.
And I found that one of the keys to my business was to find those guys, right? Like, and I had a lot of Amish guys that worked for me on the horse side.
And it's very often two different people.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm going to do a backcountry wilderness hunt now with livestock, I almost won't do it unless somebody is going to dedicate themselves towards, taking
Yeah.
care of that
Oh yeah.
stock and just live at camp and understand that like that's what they're going to do. Like, me and Mom and Kirk will go out, and Mom is pumped to just stay in camp. Even
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
even if I'm going to be out for a couple days, like whatever, and then she can take the horses to water twice a day and make sure elk or wolves don't run
Yeah.
run through everything and cause a big drama. And if you don't have that, oftentimes you're leaving your hunt right during the time that you need to
Yeah.
be there to go take care of the stock.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. And the thing is like this time of year, right? In September, people always would think, okay, guiding wilderness elk hunts, horseback stuff, mules, whatever. In September, it's nice. The mountains are nice. The weather's usually not that brutal, but it's the hardest on staff because the days are so long.
Yeah.
And when you throw in horses to deal with up on the mountain, I don't think people really conceptualize. You want to hunt those prime hours in the morning. You want to be riding home in the pitch black dark so you can hunt the prime hours in the afternoon. Well, if you do that, when a guide gets back to camp, he's got to feed those horses. He's got to take care of all that, do the saddling, all of that before he even eats dinner. And then he's got to get up early to hit the prime hours in the morning. I think personally that's the hardest hunt to guide that I've ever been around. Is an archery elk hunt, horseback in the mountains out of a wall tent camp. I like to this day, I'll admit that I was burnt out on guiding that type of hunt. But I have guys that work for me for years that are just so tough that they still like doing it, and they amaze me.
Yeah.
Because it's the hardest hunt. People want to talk about sheep hunting, goat hunting, all this other stuff. The backpack hunts or whatever. To me, all that doesn't matter. In terms of the psychological strain of guiding, that's the worst. And it's hardest, and because of that, it's the hardest to find competent guides.
For sure. And even if you find people who are willing to do it, you get such a diminished return after a certain amount of time. Like we're sitting here September 21st. So I've guided for, 20 days straight or something so far this year. I've worked over 450 hours this month.
Yeah.
It takes a lot out of you, and you get to the point where your memory starts to fail really quickly. You can't remember what you did that morning. Every day kind of feels like 3 days.
Yeah, sure.
And you have a hard time remembering like where people have been hunting. I was joking the other night that I think I could legitimately get to the point where I might forget that I had a hunter out in the field and leave
sure.
them out there.
Yeah. Well, it's constant, right? You get the constant pressure of things, and at the same time, the next client that comes, the next, if it's not in the guiding scenario, if you're just hunting a lot and you've got your next family member to come hunt with you or whatever, it's like it's still like the peak of their hunting season, right? So you don't want to go into hunts beat up and tired and all that. So that almost creates like an additional stressor, because like this is important to the next person. Even though I'm kind of ready, I'm ready for the sun to go down on September. The next person, it's like their 5 days that they look forward to the whole year or whatever. So,
even like by this point in the month, we've got half an hour less daylight than we did in the beginning, and that half hour makes a really big difference to the guides.
Sure. Yeah.
Like that's sometimes an extra like 20% more sleep.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So you would start guiding when?
In terms of the season?
Yeah.
So our big hunting season, I had a much smaller fly fishing business, but that would keep some of my guides busy starting whenever the snow would melt. So it'd be like July 1st or whatever. But most of the peak of my business was August 15th through the end of the fourth rifle season. And when I say August 15th or August 10th or whatever is when we started to put in all of our camps.
Yep.
And that can be, in a way that's where everybody's fresh and things go smoothly. Typically that time of year you got good weather, but it's a lot of work when you putting in all those wall tent camps. I would say that's more of a physical part of the season, you know. Um, so that we'd start then, and then we would hunt basically wilderness wall tent camps, depending on the year, till 10th of November or something like that, and then we'd do some lodge hunting after that. And then I had a smattering of different type of hunts that would go maybe a little bit later than that, but that was basically our season.
So how many clients would go through your operation in a year?
Yeah, so when I started, the business had shrunk a whole lot, but it had a lot of capacity in terms of like a federal permitting standpoint. So I went from doing like a dozen hunts in the beginning to I think probably my peak year between all the hunts and not necessarily just in the flat tops. I had some other little things, some private stuff I leased and those sort of things. I did somewhere close to 250 hunts.
That's incredible. Yeah, logistics is such a massive part of that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, massive part of that. Logistics, communication. I honestly can't imagine the scale of that. How many people did you have working for you?
So it would fluctuate a lot, but during the rifle seasons, and there's two components of that. One, I'm like I guess like probably an over optimizer. So I had a lot of guys that would work for me for a couple weeks, year after year, and then I had full-time crew, and I just kind of knew when the peak of my season was in terms of everything. But max, I had probably close to 20 guys there, 18 guys or something like that. And they all either were living in camps or they were living at our place,
Yeah.
like our pack station. And then I had some guys that I dealt with more staff than that during the year, but that would be peak, like on site doing work or guiding I'd have. And that, I mean, if anybody out there who's listening who wants to get into the outfitting business, or I think probably any outdoor recreation business, that's like the whole key to it with the people. I mean, there's like nothing else, And I throw horses and mules in there too. Basically like labor, right? Having the right ones.
Yep.
It's like the whole business.
Did the Amish help you keep your gear up?
Yeah, so the Amish guys, and I had several of them work for me for 5 or 6 years, they essentially took over where they had primary responsibility over tack, packing, and some of the horse care stuff. And then the other thing that I always found was interesting and very helpful is they took care of all my traditional saw stuff. So all my cross cuts, all my axes, all that stuff, they were like in charge of keeping that up to speed, sharpening it, all that. And probably to listeners, that sounds like a very minor component of it, but they probably never tried to sharpen a crosscut saw. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's not just sharpening, it's tuning as well.
Yeah. Yep.
That is such an incredible skill. It's so incredible that at sawmills, oftentimes the two highest paid workers are the electrician and the guy who's in charge of sharpening.
Yeah, it keeps things sharp. Sure. So that was a part of the business that they helped me a lot on. I would say that was one of my biggest assets when I left was having them help me on that. And I say them, dude. I mean, these guys, like Mark, kind of my head horse guy at the time, packing guy. I mean, he worked for me for 6 or 7 years.
Yeah.
So he's a good guy.
It's like family at that point.
Yeah. Yep.
Totally.
Yep. But so yeah, that was the horse component of it. And the same deal with guides. I had guides that worked for me for 6 or 7 years, and they started to. Well, it's funny because guides are, I don't know, like they tend to be. There's a certain personality type, and for better or worse, guides, even if you're working for the same team, I think all outfitters deal with this. There's not always like the steady flow of information that one might think. You know what I mean? And but what I noticed is guides that work for me for 5, 6 years or whatever, once they get to that 6 or 7 years, they start to know the country so well. They've got plan A, B, C, D, E, F, G. They become very good trainers of your new guys. You never have a guide who's only at it for 2 or 3 years train your new guys, because he's just inherently, these are generalizations, but generally they will not transfer much knowledge to your new guy because they don't want to compete with them. You know what I mean? So just stuff, little things like that I learned over time, but they're all people, staff related stuff that helped.
Tell me about the flat tops.
Yeah, so the flat tops, when people talk about the flat tops, they usually talk about a much broader area than the wilderness area. I always looked at it as people would talk about the flat tops from like in my world from Yampa, down to Glenwood Canyon, all of that country in there, up past Meeker, and really they're talking about an area that's probably like 1 million acres. But the wilderness component of it, I may be slightly off on this number, but it's around 240,000 acres.
Okay.
And it's a plateau, and it's interesting because a lot of the access points, particularly on the south side and the south and the east side that I operated in, were low elevation access points, and then you went up to the plateau. So
Low elevation being like what?
like 7,500 feet, 8,000 feet, 9,000 feet access points.
So that's pretty high for a
Yeah.
lot of people.
Yeah, they wouldn't be like, when I think about like the collegians or something like that, you can drive up to 12,000 feet. You can drive, you know what I mean? You can get your elevation behind you. There's not a lot of that in the flat tops. But yeah, it's all high elevation.
Okay,
Yep.
so you're starting around 7,000 feet or higher, and then how high is it at the top?
So the plateau kind of rolls at timberline, and it's in that 12.5 range.
Gotcha.
We don't have much higher than that. We don't have like the 14er type of peaks. And the flat tops, in my view, from all the wilderness that I've been in Colorado, it's ideal horse country because you can work the elevation up with your horses, and then when you're on the top, you can travel distance. And it's been, I think, part of the outfitting dynamic in the flat tops, and one, there's a tremendous amount of public opportunity for elk in the flat tops. There always has been. The way that it's managed, the tag allocations, to this day, there's several different opportunities that somebody can just buy a tag and go hunt the flat tops, depending on there's several units in there. But it's always been an opportunity place. It's been great elk habitat, but there's always been a lot of outfitting pressure, and I think it's just historically, anybody who's got some history packing horses, they look at that country and go like, this is the spot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm sure you've been in mountain ranges and stuff. Not all places are like that.
For sure not.
Yeah.
For sure not. There's a lot of this country, next door to us in Idaho that is really tough to access with horses.
Yeah.
Really tough. It's just a little bit craggier, and it's tremendous country, but it's just a little bit tough to get around on horses for a lot of it.
Yep.
That interface between public hunting and outfitters on public land is an interesting one, and there's a lot of conflict that can come from that. How did you de-escalate that, and how did you sort of navigate those murky waters?
So I think it's an interesting topic for a bunch of reasons, James. One, it's changed a lot historically. I would say that like 30 years ago, my dad did some outfitting. If you talk to any of the old time outfitters, the general consensus amongst outfitters was the public's not welcome.
Yeah.
Generally, not all of them, but generally that was the go-to strategy because the more abrasive you were with the public, the idea was that you'd have to deal with less of them. Mm-hmm. I always had the mindset that by the time I was really active in the business, that didn't make a whole lot of sense. It didn't make a lot of logical sense, and then also I didn't want to deal with like the negativity.
Right.
That was my view. But if I focused on just the logical part of it, I mean, for how capable guys are now, the fact that there's some butt wipe on a horse that's not nice around is not going to deter these guys that are now willing to do a lot of aggressive hike, backpack hunting, that sort of thing. They've got great gear, so that wasn't a factor. And to me, like I said, like why have the negativity around? So I had several ways I dealt with it, and it's a slippery slope, right? Because you're still hunting and you still got clients, and so you want to, you're trying to protect your spots. You're trying to keep the experience of your clients good. So that was always my intention when I dealt with the public. And I think particularly as I increased like my social media presence, I had more interaction,
Mm,
right? Like not necessarily like in the field, but a lot of people, if they knew they were going to hunt the part of the flat tops where I was, it's pretty easy to figure out where I was. You
right.
could call a Forest Service guy, you could just Google it, and pretty quick you'd know kind of where I was. So I get a lot of calls. They're like, "Where are your camps? Where are you hunting?" And that sort of stuff. I I was vague like any other hunter would be. I never lied to people or anything like that, but I tried to give them guidance so their experience was better. And at the same time, I didn't have trouble in the field with my hunter's experience. So that's how I always navigated it. It's hard, because there's always this feeling, not all public hunters, but I feel like a lot of the public feels like outfitters just shouldn't be there.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And part of their logic, I understand.
Yeah.
Like, I understand that. I understand part of the logic when people, they talk about, cattle grazing or sheep grazing, all of that. Part of what people will say to me, I understand. And then a part of it I don't. You know what I mean? And I know the history and all of that, but I understand people's concern that, hey, this is a public space. What I'm trying to do seems to be affected by, commercial outfitters, cattle guys, sheep guys, whatever. So there's always these clashing interests on the forest. But, that from the beginning, the forest was set up that's just going to be how it is. You know what I mean?
Designated multi-use.
Yeah, that's like the mandate of the forest, and I think we all probably, not to like go down that rabbit hole. I think it's good for us to all understand that. Like for instance, there's a lot of outfitters that hate cattle guys, hate them, and I always took the tack that like any justification I have to severely limit their usage, make their life miserable or whatever, that same justification could be used towards me as an outfitter. It could also be used towards me as a member of the public hunting. I think there's I think hunters forget that sometimes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's still a usage, and maybe we forget about it because we're up in the mountains. We're seeing the cattle guys, we're seeing the outfitters, we're seeing other public land hunters, but there's another part of public land ownership that's not out there. It's not maybe not be a big fan of any of that. So that's how I think about it.
The last time I saw a public land permit come up in this area, it was $250,000 to buy that permit.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people don't realize just how expensive it is just to get the access to go in there and be able to operate commercially in an area. And that wasn't for a big area. How big was the area that you were operating in?
Yeah, so you mean like land mass?
Yeah.
So there's two ways to think about it. You can think about like the land mass that a permit covers,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you can think about the day use that it covers. And that's
Okay.
usually that's I mean, every state's a little bit different, and we can get into the nitty-gritty of it. So even though the forest is managed by a federal agency, each state is a little bit different in terms of how they manage things, and then each ranger district, each forest is a little bit different. And so this can vary widely, but generally your outfitting permits are going to transact on your commercial day use, right? So you're going to have X amount of elk hunting days. You're going to have X amount of, lion hunting days or whatever the different specification. And that, again, that varies by where your permit is administrated out of. It might just be 1,000 hunting days or whatever. So that's generally how they trade. In the spectrum of permits, mine was big. It wasn't like it's not the biggest hunting permit in the U.S. by any means, but it's one of the bigger ones in terms of like the scale of it. And the flat tops was kind of known for big permits because of that horse thing, big elk herd historically. But yeah, people have to buy them. Generally, they're no longer created. That tends to be the norm across all the states. They're
Right.
not. I think there's so much pushback and there's so much more uses that are arising, mountain bikes or e-bikes or these new things that the land managers have to deal with, they're very hesitant to issue a new permit. I haven't heard of one. I've heard guys expanding permits a little bit, that sort of thing, but it's pretty limited. I think that goes in the cattle world and everything else too.
And within river permits, if you're guiding whitewater fishing, you can have multiple outfitters that are operating on that river. For outfitters that are back in the mountains, it tends to be one outfitter per area. Was that
Yeah.
the case where you were?
Yeah, so again, this is something that slightly varies a little bit by ranger district, but so you might have a little overlap with your neighbor, but generally you don't. They try to have borders because outfit like we touched on the outfitter public hunter conflict. That's something that's very easily mitigated. I personally think that if everybody's polite and follows just like golden rule type of stuff, no problem. When you get where you're button up, outfitter to outfitter conflict is it's a harder thing to get over and deal with. So they try to keep guys separate, just logical.
Yeah, the last time I hunted Colorado, I backpacked way back into an area, and it was fourth season rifle hunt,
Mm-hmm.
and we ran into some outfitters back there that were just dumbfounded that we'd walked back in there that far, and they were pretty upset.
Yeah.
It's like, well, man, I'm not from around here. I'm just trying to
You're trying
to find some elk.
Yeah. Yep.
And I tried to talk to them about like what their plan was, where they're hunting.
Yeah.
Ways that I could stay out of their way. I was willing to go to places that their clients were never ever going to go to.
Yeah.
And they just didn't want to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, gosh, we're going to be stepping on each other.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what ended up happening. Another person from my party ended up killing a bull that they'd been hunting pretty hard. And, we really could have mitigated that. There's enough elk to go around.
Yeah. And that, like, to be transparent about it, James, like, the way I thought about it, if guys were there to stay, I was like, let's figure it out so everybody's better off.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's part of the deal.
Yeah.
In the end, that's the thing, man. I apologize to anybody that thinks it's just an outfitter and talking self-serving in a self-serving way, but in the end, like, an outfitter's clients, they're still public land hunters. They really are. In a sense, outfitters in the States, particularly Colorado, all they are is a service provider. I don't have control over tags, and none of that. So if I don't have control over tags, I don't have, really control over the management of the wildlife in that area. I have no, private property right to public wildlife or anything like that. If those are all the case, how can you call me a wildlife pimp? I'm more a taxi driver.
Right.
You know what I mean? That's how I viewed it. And so that was my thought on all always is like, look, my clients got tags just like the public guys out there. The public guys have maybe worked a little harder to get in there. My guys have paid, in a way for the service to get the access. But once we're in there, the golden rule applies. Like, we got to treat each other like we'd want to be treated. So that's my thought.
What stories come to mind where you had emergencies that you had to deal with?
Yeah, so I had two that pop up in my mind. One was before inReaches, and we can go into the details of that. And then one was with inReaches, and I used an inReach, the SOS deal on that inReach. Both were horse related. And so, do you want to hear a story on?
I do. I love stories.
Cool. And so I had a guy named Tom. For years he owned several like high-end Western wear shops in Aspen and Caesar's Palace and some other places. And he wasn't a hunter. He liked to do summer trips, and he'd bring friends with him typically. And he'd bring some of his staff that worked in these Western wear shops. He came several times, and then he called me one day, and he wanted to do the most remote as possible backpack trip, in the flat tops. And I knew the spot, and I had a summer camp in that spot. It's a beautiful spot. Love to stay in there. Basically like a 7-hour horseback ride in. but good country. Once you got up, is pretty flat. So we planned the trip. He's like, I'm bringing some great people. And this was early on. Like, I'd been at it for 2 or 3 years. I was excited for the trip. And I remember they showed up, all great people. But I remember asking one of the clients, Tim's wife, and I can't remember her name. I said, "Oh, are you looking forward to the camping trip?" And she's like, "Yeah, it's my first one." And I was like, "Wow, this is like a pretty big bar for your first camping trip,
taking a
man."
big bite.
Yeah, like, all right, you know. And so I was like, "Okay, we'll see how this goes." But we had it overall, the camping deal was fun. But on the way in, we went in. I had several staff with me, probably, I don't know, 30 minutes from camp. And I found over time that tends to be when this kind of crap happens. I had a string of mules in the back. I had one of my staff in the front leading. I heard a bunch of yelling, heard crashing, and I was like, okay. And then Tom, and these guys were competent horseback riders too.
Yeah.
All had experience with horses. And a matter of fact, the individual that the wreck happened to, he was riding his own horse at the time. But Tom comes riding down the trail at me, and he quietly but nervously looks at me and goes, "Cliff, Tim's dead." And I went, "What?" And that was it. I was like, okay, like, got the info, I guess.
Yeah.
And so I cruise up, and I'm looking down the hill, like it's a steep switchback, and I'm looking down, and I see Tim's horse kind of standing on a rotten log, and the saddle's on the side, and no Tim. So I'm like, okay, probably pretty good information. Maybe he is dead because it's way down there. Like, we're talking like, I don't know, like 9-10 stories down the thing, and it's pretty darn steep. And I remember I'd never seen Tim without his cowboy hat on, and I see this like glint, this shiny glint of a bald head, and I was like, yes, he's not dead, because he stood up and he's like, I'm right here, and I was like, all this epic relief, right? And then immediately my heart sank again when he held his hand up, and like the fingers were pointed in all different directions. His hand was like mangled. You know what I mean? I'm like, whoa, wow.
So he got rolled over a couple times.
Yeah, he got rolled over. Only his hand was damaged, like a trooper. You know what I mean? And I think that this trip, more than anything, made me judge people a little bit less on their background, because Tim is a very successful public company C-level guy. You know what I mean? Somebody that probably gets doted over in his day-to-day life. And like, his toughness in this situation was epic. Because like, I mean, you're talking like 4 of your 5 fingers, not just broken, but like mangled,
right?
You know? So we dealt with it. We had to spend the night in there. He was a trooper the whole time. He'd never caught fish, period, in his life. And before we left and dealt with the situation, that next morning, I took him fly fishing in like some of these high country streams are 4.5 feet wide.
Like a sidewalk.
Yeah, but you can catch those beautiful, like just like these little native cutthroats that are like, when you pick them up, they're not impressive by their size, but the color is just like, I don't know how to describe it. You know what I mean? But you know what I mean? Like,
no,
just stunning.
They're like something from science fiction. They're impossibly bright.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with his like crushed hand, we got that done. Which was cool. So that was probably
good job on living, Tim. Proud of you.
Yeah, dude. He's a stud. And the crazy thing about it is, and he worked within the Las Vegas gambling space. Like, I don't know, maybe 6 months later, I get this news article sent to me, because he showed up to a gambling commission with his arm. You know, he working on this deal that ended up being like a year process. I think multiple surgeries and stuff to solve his hand. And the reporters like wanted to hear the story, and he told the story, and it's awesome.
That's
you know
awesome.
what I mean, from his perspective, because in a way I miss the action.
Right.
You know what I mean? But it's like the whole like, you know, like Louis L'Amour version of it. You know what I mean? Like the horse rolling down the hillside, life flashing, across his mind as this is like the end or whatever. And so like I've got the article and stuff. It was awesome to see that, he made the best out of like a situation. And I think it's like an adventure of a lifetime for him because of that.
Yeah. The first times that I was dealing with like horse and mule wrecks, and, growing up on a ranch, I'd seen like animal disasters my whole life. So
sure.
I wasn't brand new to it, but
yeah,
I was at one time brand new to it in the wilderness when I was by myself. And I would try to stop the problem while it was still occurring. And I was talking, with another guide who's a close friend of mine now. And he's like, man, you just need to stay out of it until everything quits breaking.
Yeah.
Like you're just going to get hurt if you try and get in the middle of it. And oftentimes when you have these things unfolding, that is really the best thing to do, is just stay out of it until everything stops. And sometimes this wreck can occur over the course of a mile or more.
Yeah.
And you're just listening to like figure out where all these animals end up and where all this gear ends up strewn across the mountainside. And then you just kind of start figuring out which ropes need to get cut and start over and put the pieces back together and, calm all the animals down and make sure nobody's hurt and assess everything and then just continue the job. I can see, why people are intimidated by kind of getting into that horse and mule packing scene. It would be a very intimidating thing to do if you didn't have a background with it already or kind of grow up with it. But you can have some really wonderful experiences that you would not otherwise be capable of having without that stock.
Oh yeah, sure.
Packing is something that can occur for clients in a few different ways. So you can have like a fully outfitted camp in the backcountry where, they're going to bring you in there horseback. They're going to bring all your stuff in. The camp is going to be set up for you. They're going to cook and guide you the whole time that you're there, help you recover the animal. But there's also such a thing as a drop camp, which is a really good option for people that I don't think enough folks realize is an option.
Yeah.
So tell me about what a drop camp is and sort of which hunter that would appeal to the most. And not just hunters, like anybody that wants to go into the backcountry with gear.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what it is, and I'll tell you what it isn't, because I think that's just as important, James.
I agree.
And the thing about elk hunting, and like you said, you could do this. I did a lot of drop camp, like fishing style things. I think they're a great option for that too. But the economics of elk hunting, it gets more and more expensive, every year, and I don't see that going away. So a drop camp is a good way to, with at a decent value, get a pretty cool experience. But I think people should go into it with the right mindset. And in terms of the actual service, what mine were, and this is going to be, I would say drop camps they're like the commodity of the outfitting world. They're pretty similar across outfitters. So you're going to have a wall tent camp, maybe one big 16 by 20 wall tent if it's a group of 3 or 4 guys. If it's a bigger group, you might have an additional tent. There's some differences there. You're going to have cots, or in my camps, you had cots, you had pads, you had a wood stove in the wall tent, you had a propane stove in there, all your pots and pans, any of that stuff. I actually had a service, and I think probably intelligently, the guys who bought my business, I don't think they do it anymore, but I used to do food too. I'd prep food, you have somebody prep food for them and bring the food in and stuff too. So I'd do meal prep, which was a great service. I never made any profit off of it, so it wasn't a great business, but I liked doing it, and guys liked it, so I did that. But it's just a well-equipped camp. Pack you in, pack out any game you kill, back to the pack station, hang it, cool it, take it to the processor. That was all included. That varies a little bit by outfitter, and then we'd pack you out. That's the deal. And then while you're in there, you're hunting on your own. It varies a little bit by outfitter in terms of how much an outfitter is willing to help you in terms of knowledge of the area, guidance like that. I was lucky because it wasn't just the size of my permits. I had a lot of camps for the size of my permits. So I always guided out of a select set of camps, and then my other camps were drop camps. So I didn't have a, like, I'm not going to tell you about this spot near your camp because my guides like to hunt it deal. I generally didn't have that. There can be, there can be a little overlap just because guides on horses travel a lot, that sort of thing. So I'm not going to say that never existed, but generally I was very open to sharing a lot of information with my drop camp guys. For listeners, depending on where you go, you'll have to, in the individuals you're working with, you just got to have that expectation may differ a whole lot. Some guys may not tell you anything. They may not know anything. You know what I mean? A lot of guys just don't hunt their drop camps. They just, they don't know. Other guys will provide you a lot of knowledge. And the drop camps, because people always ask me, well, what is the success rate of a drop camp compared to a guided camp? I think it's not a great question to ask, because again, like the guided camp, a lot of what you're paying for is service. Like you're not doing the chores, you're cooking, there's horses there, you've got the guides, so there's a component of that. Obviously the success rate is much higher too, on average, the guided versus drop camp. But I can tell you in my history of outfitting, there are family groups and groups of individuals that came every year and hunted like the same 1 or 2 drop camps, and they had higher success rate as drop camp hunters than my average guided hunt.
Yep.
Because they knew the area.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I think, if that's something that appeals to you, my thought is, one, think about it as maybe a multi-year experience, and think about that when you're hunting, so you kind of learn that country. All this wilderness stuff is volatile, and you could go there and hit it right, and then the next year you have a tough hunt. But it's a lot easier if you hit it right and you think about what's going on and try to capture that knowledge. In a tough year, you're going to do a lot better. You know what I mean? Because now you got some knowledge. You can squeak one out, probably still, that sort of thing. So I think that's one of my biggest pieces of advice related to drop camps. And the other thing is, I think there's one big downside of drop camps if people don't plan accordingly, and that's that elk, depending on the season, they can be widely dispersed in an insane amount of habitat. And a lot of people might cringe at this, but outfitters generally, I never hunted all my permitted camps every year. I selected which camps I was going to put in based on, the years of experience, right? Like, okay, I think we can hunt this one effectively, and then I've got a buffer enough against this one. That's how I manage them. This one does pretty well in archery season. This one does pretty well during third rifle season. I've got a bunch of deer hunters coming in 2019. I'm going to make sure and put them in here because we did good on deer in 2017. Like, that was the extent of my planning. But once those camps are in, the outfitters are not moving these camps around chasing elk with the camps.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so you have to keep in mind that there's a downside there, that you're packed into a location, but if there's not any elk within that region, and the reality is some of that is self-fulfilling. If you act a certain way in those camps, even if there are elk in there, they're going to be gone pretty quick.
Dude.
So you got to deal with that. But even if at no fault of the hunter, I put guys into camps that, they would call me a day or 2 days in, like, I cannot find elk. It's like, well, you got to go find them. You know what I mean? You got to go find them. And that could be that you're missing little nooks and crannies that are near camp, or it could mean that you should have brought a backpack tent in.
Yeah.
And I hate to say that, because I think people cringe at that because they think they're buying a spot. It's still going to be hit or miss. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, there's a couple pieces of advice I'd give to drop camp guys. One is, like, you are hunting on the way into camp and you're hunting as soon as you get there. So I've been in these backpack situations, especially where as soon as people get to camp, they're loud, they're clanking on stuff, they're talking really loud. It's like, dude, we're hunting right now.
Yeah.
Like, season might not open until tomorrow, but if you're loud, you're going to blow elk out of this area. They can hear you from a mile away right now.
Yeah.
So you've got to take it really seriously and try and limit your noise, even like smoke and food smell and things like that. Those are good things to have discipline with, because if you get yourself in a situation where you've got to go, say, 2 or 3 miles away from where you're camped to start hunting, that means you're leaving that much earlier in the dark,
it's hard.
getting back that much later. That fatigue is going to set in, and that fatigue is very real. So that's one thing. Another thing is, people will think that since they're riding a horse in there, that they're going to show up fresh, and it's like those miles were free to get there.
Yeah.
And it's fatiguing in a very different way to ride in. And if you haven't been riding much, I don't care if you like spent your whole childhood on a horse. If it's been a while, you're gonna be saddle sore, and you're gonna hurt really badly. It doesn't mean that you can't still walk, but you're not showing up fresh like you just got off the couch at home. Yeah. I like to bring a really lightweight setup with me if I'm going to be in a drop camp scenario, so that I can go spike out. So I can then go that additional 4 or 5 miles and set up something really lightweight. I can hunt out of that off my back. I try not to hunt off my back for more than 3 days at a time.
Yeah.
Because that seems to be the 3 days I can be in like that 35-pound range in relatively cold weather. And that means I can still haul a full load of meat plus my camp back. And my additional trips, I'm going to go in slick with like nothing but a headlamp and water and like really haul meat from that point forward. But I think those guys are extremely effective who treat their drop camp like a base camp and then can spike out from there. And that can be tough, but man, it is dirty effective. And you were talking about one of your guides that you said was just an assassin who just kind of sleep in the rocks. If you had to.
And there's guys that I had drop camp hunters, that were like that. Like, I remember this one older guy. I mean, he was in his mid 70s, and he actually, when I bought the area, he was one of those original 12 clients. Him and his buddy Ross and Jan were their names, and they're from Traverse City. They're great guys, and they taught me a lot of that country because they'd hunted it for 20 years.
Oh, what a gift!
Yeah, and this guy, this older guy, he would kill bulls way up in there, and I'd go in there, and I go in there, pack a bull out. Some of these things were like overnighters, right? Like, by the time we got it all packed up, we really, had to stay there tonight and come out the next day. But he would carry a milk jug with water and a blue tarp. And that was like his setup. Yeah. Like, he was tough enough to do that. And we're talking like second rifle season, first rifle season. Like, it's cold, man.
Sure.
October 15th at, 12,000 feet, it gets cold. And he just, that's what he would do. That was like his form of spiking out. Me personally, like, I'm not tough enough for that, I've done that a couple times inadvertently, but the point is, like, what you're saying is you can be prepared to do that. And I will say, this is probably a very good question to ask whoever you're working with, like outfitters, because some outfitters frown upon it. They don't want conflict with other drop camps, or they don't want you to go over to interact with their guided camp or whatever, and they want to give you boundaries. I'm not saying that that's the wrong way to do it, but I never did that. Yeah. I didn't feel like it was relevant, and there was a negative side to that. Yeah, you could have guys that left a drop camp and spiked over near another drop camp. As long as they were being polite, following what I thought were kind of standard rules, it was what it was.
Yeah, and just give them the knowledge. Be like, hey, just so you know.
Oh, yeah, I told them where the camps were. Yeah, absolutely.
And then everybody's fine. Everybody's fine.
Yeah. And the craziest thing, I can tell you, I saw this 1,000 times, man, when I was guiding up there or between drop camps or whatever. when you're hunting drainages, and they're huge drainages, right? And there's a drop camp on this side, on the east side, and there's a drop camp on the west side, and they're miles away from each other, and they're a long hike from each other, and they're not competing. The guys on the west side get up in the morning, and they glass over to the east side, and they're thinking, why in the hell don't those guys go kill those elk?
Right.
They're surrounded by elk.
Yeah.
And the guys over here get up and glass over here and be like, why don't they kill those bulls that are bedded right above their camp?
Yep.
You know what I mean? It's hilarious. Like, it happens all the time. And there's so many, like, there's these, it's just perspective. You know what I mean? And I always thought that was funny because it would be like, oh, well, they came over here, they killed a bull above camp. It's like, well, they could see it, man. And if you don't have a way to communicate, can you really fault them? You know? Obviously, if it's like, they knew you were hunting it, they were seeing you out there looking at the bull every day, yeah, that's not cool. But if there was a bull up there a half mile above your camp that you guys never went up there and looked at, yeah, it's this perspective, and they happened to see it, So that was the way I dealt with it.
I'd say that a great big bull who's on his feet to the top of his antlers is never going to be more than 8 feet off the ground. Would you say that's about right?
Yeah, so you're saying just physically.
Yeah.
Yeah. From a bull standing there, and their antlers are never straight up, so
probably
less than 8 feet. Yeah.
So that's all the terrain it takes to completely obscure a big old animal.
Yeah.
And it's really, really easy to do. So looking back across canyon is a great way to glass animals up. But it can take a gargantuan, if not impossible, effort to get over there sometimes.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Or by the time you do, the information that you acted on was no longer relevant.
Right.
I have seen more times than not where people deliberated about making a big move longer than it would take them to make the move.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's another thing. And if it's even a question in your mind, like, I wonder if we can get there before it's dark. Yeah. I think you probably can. If you wonder, like, if you look at it and you say there's no way we can get there by dark, sure, make a plan for tomorrow.
Yeah.
But if it's a question in your mind, just grab your pack and freaking give it and get over there. Because you need 1 minute of shooting light to make it happen.
Yeah. This is a topic that I migrated on in the last like 4 or 5 years of outfitting,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll give credit to a couple of my best guides that were real they're more aggressive than I was. And we would have arguments about this kind of thing all the time. And I started to realize over time that, like, if you ran the stats on it, it almost always made sense to do it.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And I started being fairly hesitant to that, but I changed over time just based on the data set, you know. I had one guide in particular, Evan, who to this day he's very aggressive. Like, if there's a chance he can kill him today instead of tomorrow, he's going to do it.
Yep.
You know. So yeah, no, I would agree with that. There's just so many things that can change, you know.
I tend to be of that mindset on public land. Like, your best opportunity is your first opportunity. Yeah. On private land, I might be like, next week.
Yeah, sure. It's totally different.
Yeah, totally different situation. And it's not that the elk are acting that much differently. It's that there's fewer pressures.
Yeah.
Fewer pressures.
Yeah, and even public land, I mean, if I'm hunting public land for mule deer second rifle season, you know, pre-rut stuff, and we're able to find a big deer, yeah, I'll wait. You know what I mean? He's in like a little hole, like nobody's found him, like probably nobody's going to find him, you know, that's why he's there. That's different. But elk, I mean, the best analogy I can say is that those elk, man, it's like they get enough pressure during those rifle seasons, those wilderness areas. It's like pinball game. You know what I mean? That you're knocking the ball around, and sometimes the ball will hang up in a spot next to a paddle, and it's just a matter of time before somebody goes over and whacks that paddle, and then now the ball's somewhere else.
Yep.
You know what I mean? It's just, and it could be where I'd say the majority of the time, it's not necessarily somebody else hunting that bull. It's somebody going under that bull, and the bull wins them or whatever. As far as that bull's concerned, if he wins somebody who's just walking by, that somebody was trying to kill him.
Right.
He's going to move just like any other scenario, So yeah, it's a different game.
Is elk the animal most worth hunting in the world?
Dude, that's a good question. Um, oh man, given my history, I'd love to say that it's the apex of everything, but you're probably asking the wrong guy. Because I think my dreams in the hunting world are so like location and adventure based
Mm-hmm.
that I can't say that it is.
Yeah.
For me right now in my life, it's not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? For somebody else, it is. For me right now, Tar in New Zealand is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So yeah, I think having said that though, as a North American deal, I hope that every hunter gets a chance to kill one. Just because like the playful kid part of me tells me that I've never walked a guy or gal to their first elk and had them look at me and be like, it's smaller than I thought it was.
Mm.
They're just big.
They're huge
You know what I
animals.
mean? And if
Yeah.
you've never had that opportunity, and it sounds so like simplistic or whatever, but it's relevant.
Yeah.
They're just the one big majestic game animal we have here.
Yeah. I've guided, a lot of elk at this point. Over 100,000 pounds of elk I've had in my hands. And especially the first elk of the season, every time I walk up to them, I'm like, damn, these things are big.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's a relevant component, and even being here with you, and it's a different experience. Like bugling still. I get off on bugling. I don't know. I always will.
It's a thrilling thing.
Yeah.
It's a thrilling thing to hear that sound, and to know what it might mean.
Yeah. Sure.
To wonder what it might mean.
Yeah, and bugling at its heart is the weirdest sound ever. You know what I mean? Like if you just showed up somewhere and you weren't exposed to elk, you'd be like, "What is that?"
Yeah.
Like this extreme whistle that has like aggression built in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Cliff, it's an absolute honor to have you out here and to be working with you this year. You have a huge amount of experience that I feel like I'm only beginning to understand a little bit. You're also extremely humble, and you're constantly looking not only for ways to learn, but for ways to show people what you're learning and to help them learn. And I think that that's the greatest power of what you're doing with your social media and with your YouTube, which is a resource that I use a lot, is watching your videos because I learn a lot from them. What's something that you feel like you've learned out here this week?
Yeah, man. So the biggest thing that I've learned, or let's say it's like ingrained more in me, is that elk and the geography, vegetation they're in, all of that differs so widely.
Mm.
And your tactics, to me, like I'm glassing centric. I always have been, and that's a reflection of where I've hunted, and I enjoy it. Right, that's like a part of like what I like, but here in this place, you realize like, oh wow, like that. I don't know that I've picked up binoculars more than once or twice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's a different topography, different vegetation, and that can't be as big a part of your strategy here. And it's not that hey, like, I've learned some special tactic about hunting, this type of vegetation, where you can't see as much. It's more the idea that elk can live in 1,000 different places, thrive in 1,000 different places, and you're going to have to adjust to what you're doing based on that.
Yeah.
That's probably more the lesson for me. And every time I underestimate that, I get proven wrong,
Yeah. Yeah. If I was in the mountains, I would rather like forget my boots and my binoculars.
Yeah.
But here, if I left my knockers behind, like I'd be like, all right,
yeah,
whatever,
Sure.
I don't know that I need them that much. I still use them, and I use them in a very different way here. And I glass through brush a lot. I will glass at a tree, and try and run my focus so that I can I'll bring that tree into focus, and then I'll move it just slightly enough so that I can see through
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
And I end up, glassing on my knees a lot
yeah,
and things like that. But glassing close range is something that a lot of Western hunters don't develop as a
yeah, yeah,
skill, and they often find themselves in situations where they probably should.
yeah,
And man, if you're in a thicket and you can only see 20 yards, you should be stopping and running your
yeah,
binoculars
yeah.
from time to time.
Yep.
And a lot of guys that don't will end up blowing animals out, whether they're
Yeah,
deer
yeah.
or elk or bears or
Sure.
whatever. And it is an interesting thing. It is an interesting thing.
I had a whitetail guy call that burning the brush,
Yep.
and I think that's a cool term.
Yep.
That gives you the idea. To me, it's like that's yeah, it's exactly what you do. The thing is like that tactic you're saying, and that's why I think it is useful to hunt them in different areas, James, because close range glassing you can use that in the mountains too.
For sure.
Like I got where I picked up glassing tight aspens that had a bunch of like they were dying aspen groves, a lot of deadfall, and those mule deer just tuck up against a log or something like that, and you can glass only 600 yards with a spotter,
Right.
and you'll find stuff.
Yep.
You know, yeah. No, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I think you can apply things if you're hunting them in different areas too.
Yeah. And that's part of the reason that I prefer spotting scopes that have a low bottom end power range.
Yeah.
If you have a spotter that starts at like 20 power or something higher than that, if you're glassing at less than 1,000 yards, your field of view is so narrow
Yeah.
that it's not a very efficient method. So I really like spotters that are in like that 20 to 40 power
Yeah.
or 10 to 40 power range or 10 to 30 power range. But I'll end up using 10 power
Yeah.
more than anything else.
Yeah, me too. I would say that like the top 30% of my spotter magnification, I use less than 5% of the time. Most of the time I use it when I'm digiscoping,
Yeah.
phone scope or what's the magnetic one I use now, but yeah, I use it for that once I
Yeah.
see things. I don't use it for the actual hunting part of it. I always use lower. Lower. I mean, I pick up game easier that way too.
You're dealing with gear and you're reviewing gear a lot. What's a piece of gear you want to shout out before we close out this episode?
Oh, man. Dude, you know what I'm gonna shout out is the knife sharpeners we used today.
I would
It,
concur 100%.
yeah,
I'm gonna order one of those today.
yeah, and it's a big company, no secret or anything, but the work sharp sharpeners. So there's two of them I actually like, man. The Ken Onion electric one.
Yep.
So if you're worried about the fact that your fillet knife is a different angle than your hunting knife, it's got like a little dial and it works good. And you can work different different roughness in terms of the different belts you put on it. It's handy. I love the thing, particularly once I get my knives real beat up.
Yep.
I have like such a OCD mind. I know like okay, I can get that exact angle back, whatever I want. So I like that. And then the guys at Worksharp sent me their small little field sharpener, and I thought that thing was so gimmicky because it has like everything on it.
Yeah.
You know?
That is a good piece of gear, though.
Yeah, it works pretty good.
Yeah.
Works pretty darn good. Good camp sharpener.
For sure. And then the diamond grip plates on that one pop off.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
So you can, if you want to go slick and lightweight, you can just pop off the diamond grit side
okay.
and throw it in your pack.
Yeah.
And then you're really light. But no, that one is a really good piece of gear. I've used that one for years. The Ken Onion one, you pulled that thing out today. I really like that. I really like. I have no relationship with Worksharp.
Yeah, me neither.
But man, I'm all about people knowing that that's a good piece of
Yeah,
kit.
it's very very handy.
Yeah.
So yeah, man.
Where can people follow along on the adventures of Cliff Gray?
Yeah, so the best way to do it is my my Instagram. It's Cliff GRY. YouTube, it's just Cliff Gray. So if you go in the search bar, type in Cliff Gray, and you can get on my website, pursuitwithcliff.com, and you can sign up for my newsletter there. So any of those, we'll keep you in touch with me.
Does that cost people money?
None of it costs any money.
That's pretty cool.
So
that's pretty cool, folks. If you're getting good, unbiased information from somebody with a bunch of outfitting and hunting experience, that is worth it's worth a lot of money. And if you can get it for free, you should take that opportunity. You should take that opportunity. Highly, highly recommend. Well, sir, we've got another client showing up this evening, and I am sending you guys on about the toughest hunt that I can come up with first thing tomorrow morning.
We're gonna have fun.
We need to go do a little map recon and make a plan.
Sounds good, man. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much for listening. I'm going to keep bringing you these stories from normal people just like you who have done extraordinary things. Everyone is an expert at something, and they have interesting perspectives on life and work and the environment and all the things that we care about. I'm going to keep bringing that to you. And I want to thank you so much for making this show possible. I also want to thank Emily Bratcher for producing this show. She does a great job editing. Really appreciate her. I want to thank John Chatelain. He did the art for the Six Ranch podcast. And Celia, soon to be Harlander, she digitized that so that we can get it out there on the internet for you. Also want to thank Justin Hay for writing this original music and the beautiful whistling that you're listening to right now. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. Please keep listening to the show. Write me a review if you feel like it, and just keep doing your thing, and we'll all learn from this together. It's been fun, and we're just getting started.